Hey, Chris Sider here. Today's video is about what to do if you're still in love with your ex, but they don't love you. It's a real difficult topic to really get into, but the first thing I would always recommend for people to do if they're new to this process or they're really unsure if they should even be trying to get their ex back is to actually go to our website, www.exboyfriendrecovery.com, and take our quiz that you see there. The quiz is basically going to tell you what kind of chance you have of getting your ex back. And by taking the quiz, you're going to get some really cool things. Number one, you're going to get an answer on if you should or shouldn't be trying to get your ex back. And in many cases, even if you shouldn't be getting your ex back, there are things you can do. The second thing you're going to also get access to is me. You're going to be able to ask me questions and hopefully get to the bottom of some answers for your situation. And finally, the third thing you're going to do or get if you actually take that quiz is a free group coaching session, right? I've got free group coaching sessions running every 15 minutes where I basically take you from start to finish on how to get your ex back, which is especially relevant if you're still in love with your ex, but they don't love you. So again, if you want to take the quiz, all you have to do is simply look in the description link below this YouTube video. You should see a link there. It's a blue link with some text surrounding it saying take our free 2-minute quiz. Simply click on that. It will take you to a page. That's the quiz where it's going to ask you lots of questions. Answer those questions to the best of your ability and we'll give you an answer. All right. So with that out of the way, let's begin.
I still love my ex. What can I do? This is a question I receive all of the time, and I thought rather than answering it in the most basic way, because I feel like sometimes I get asked the same question over and over again, and I'm giving the same answer over and over again, I thought I would change things up with this particular video. So I'm going to answer your question, but I'm also going to expand on it greatly, right? So what can you do if you still love your ex, but you're worried that they don't love you or they have specifically and explicitly told you that they don't love you? What can you do? Well, I think always the first thing I would start off by saying to someone is it's important for you to grasp why you still love your ex. Now, I know that may seem like a strange question or a strange thing for me to put forth, but I want you to consider the sort of flaw in human thinking. So, human beings, we have this tendency to view love as this grand thing. Love conquers all, right? I mean, Hollywood is responsible for this potentially where entire movies or franchises are made out of the idea that love conquers all. And maybe there's some merit to that, but physiologically, that's not the case at all. Love is nothing more than chemicals. Your brain regulates chemicals. These chemicals, when they get released, they create the feeling of love inside of you. Now, I'm saying that not to be controversial or rude or put down the idea of love, because I'm certainly a slave to love, just like you're a slave to love, just like everyone is a slave to love. Those chemicals that your brain releases are extremely powerful. So I'm not saying that to rag on the idea of loving someone or loving something. I'm saying it so that you understand how it works. Because I think too often people lose sight of how love actually works. And if it's possible for you to understand, like, okay, look, I know I'm feeling really bad now because I love my ex so much. I have a tendency to maybe make this a catastrophe, right, when it's really not a catastrophe. And I understand, okay, there's some chemicals involved here. If you understand that, you can understand how to make it work for you. Now, I want to say one thing before I move on and actually start getting to the nitty-gritty of this video. Love is really interesting, and specifically love when it comes to breakups. Like, they've actually done studies where they have attached people to MRIs or given people an MRI machine or put their brains in an MRI machine and shown them pictures of their exes when they've like straight off of a breakup. And they found that the part of the brain that lights up is the same part of the brain that lights up when a drug addict is looking for a fix. So as you can imagine, the chemicals that get released by your brain are on par with someone who is maybe trying to quit smoking or quit hard drugs, and they're just hungering for that fix. Now, I've said that a lot of times, but I want you to understand, if you can understand how this works, you can also understand, okay, like, let's rise above this and maybe become a little bit more logical. Now that you understand how love works and why you're still in love with your ex, let's actually start talking about what you can do about it. So the first thing I say to people who come to me with the question of like, what can I do next, is you need to have the proper framework. You cannot go into this expecting to just figure out what works and feel your way along. Right? That's a recipe for disaster and a recipe for failure. Getting an ex back gets a really bad rap. Why? Well, it gets a really bad rap because I think most of the people who try to get their exes back don't come at it with any kind of concrete game plan or anything proven in science, anything that's been tested on a mass scale. They just feel their way towards success. And sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't. So often when I first started my business of teaching people how to get back with their exes, which is a very controversial business because guess what? Society hates the idea of getting back with an ex. Oh, why would you want to do that? There's more fish in the sea. I'm sure you've experienced some of this from maybe your friends or family who are tired of hearing you obsess about your ex time and time again, right? Now, the interesting thing is, when I first started this, I remember thinking there's no way an ex would want to come back. But I learned that our success rate actually kept rising as time went on, as we started learning more. Why? We started learning and testing on a mass scale of what works and what doesn't work. Now, I would still say the odds are tough, right? It's tough, and it depends on lots of factors that are out of your control. And when something is out of your control, it makes life a little bit more difficult for you. Now, with that being said, what is the proper framework you should be using to get your ex back? Great question. It's a great question, and I have actually answered it multiple times on my website and in my best-selling book, Ex-Boyfriend Recovery Pro or Ex-Girlfriend Recovery Pro, right? So actually, if you're interested in having the game plan and having the proper framework that we've tested on a mass scale and figured out what works and what doesn't work, all you have to do is simply look in the description, expand the description down. You'll see that I have all of my resources there. I have my book there, Ex-Boyfriend Recovery Pro, Ex-Girlfriend Recovery Pro. You can get that if you want the proper framework. Now, I'm not in here to pitch products to you. I'm in here to help you. But for me to give you the proper framework, it's probably will take 10 hours. And I'm not even kidding about that. So if you want to learn about the proper framework, either go to the website or pick up my book. All right, what's the next thing? Well, the next thing is actually to do something scary together with your ex. Now, I know that sounds weird, but have you ever heard of this idea called misattribution of emotions? The concept is pretty simple, but it's a little bit complicated to explain, so I'll do my best for you. Misattribution of emotions basically states that when you feel something, when you're with someone and you feel something emotional, you're likely to attribute that emotion to whatever makes sense, right? So the perfect example of this is actually they did a study where they were trying to look at how people would misattribute their emotions, right? So what they did is they took a group of men and they divided them into two groups. You got group A and you got group B, right? And they gave the men a simple directive. All right, so all you're going to have to do is walk across this bridge. Just walk across a bridge and talk to the woman at the end of the bridge. She's going to ask you a few questions about your experience. Be as honest as possible with her, and that's that. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, here's the test. They had one group of men walk across a very, very concrete, sturdy bridge. Then they had another group of men, group B, walk across a bridge that was half falling apart, was like holding on just a little bit by a few threads, and it's real scary, it's real creaky, it's going back and forth. And what they were trying to do and trying to determine is which group of men will ask the woman at the end of the bridge for her number more. What they found significantly, I don't remember the exact number, so I'm just spitballing, but I think around 70% of the men in group B ended up asking the woman for her number. Why? Because they did something scary. That adrenaline rush came up, and what did they attach it to? Something that made sense to them. The woman at the end of the bridge, right? So if you actually do something scary together, like watching a scary movie, together with your ex, that kind of thing can actually bond you because it creates those emotions and they will put those emotions onto you. Now, I do want to say this is a double-edged sword. It can go both ways. If you do something together and the experience is awful, you don't want them to put that awful experience onto you. So you need to be careful about how you do this. All right, so what's the next thing? Well, the next thing is to actually subtly show interest in someone else. Now, this is interesting, right? So when I was actually researching this video, I was researching specifically what can you do? What factors can you control to make someone fall in love with you? And one of the things that they talked about across multiple different scientists and researchers was the idea that if you like someone, you should actually show interest in their friend. Now, that left me kind of scratching my head a little bit because I can understand why it would work. I mean, the thought is, okay, by putting the attention on their friend instead of on your actual target, the actual target's going to hunger and crave for your attention. Also, there's that idea of competition involved there. But it made me scratch my head because this has not been indicative of the results that I've seen with breakups and trying to get an ex back. I've actually found that it's extremely negative if you tell someone who's gone through a breakup with their ex and say, like, hey, I want you to go hit on your ex's friend. Now, I think it's important. The important distinction to make is there's a difference between someone who you like that you've never dated and someone who you want back that you have dated, right? So I've actually altered this concept to not include friends, your ex's friends, but just go dating someone else, because we've actually seen positive results when you have dated someone else that isn't your ex's friends. For whatever reason, that little fact that you've dated them, they take it as a huge slight if you go with their friends. So instead, what you need to do is actually start subtly showing interest in someone else. Go on a few dates, post on social media. You don't have to post you guys making out if you go on a date. Just post something that shows that you're on a date and that you're having fun. And that can actually lead to putting you kind of in a higher value in your ex's mind, right? But without a doubt, one of my favorite things to talk about is actually cultivating your ideal image. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, this is the last vital thing we're going to be talking about, but I want to tell you a story. Have you ever heard of the ungettable girl? It's something that I talk about with my women coaching clients all of the time. The ungettable girl. It's essentially this ideal to strive towards, right? It's sort of like she leaves a wake of men in her path. Every man is spellbound by her, and she just has this extra charisma she brings to the table. And I thought a lot about specifically how this spell gets created. What do women do to men to become ungettable? And I thought a lot about it as I was actually writing the article for this video and also thinking about what I was going to say in this video. And the story that popped into my mind was actually the first time that I ever experienced the ungettable girl, right? The idea of it. And the story is pretty interesting. I was actually I was out having drinks with my friend. His name was Wes. And my friend Wes, he had a girlfriend at the time. We were having drinks, and this waitress walks over, right? This waitress is beautiful. Now, the interesting thing about beauty in my mind is all about possibilities. It's all about what life can be like with that person, right? You see someone, they're beautiful. The first thing you start thinking isn't like, oh, wow, she's so beautiful. You start thinking about the possibilities of what things would be like with that person. I'll give you an example. My wife, when I first met her, or when I first saw her, the very first thing I saw of her was actually her. Beautiful, drop dead, the most beautiful woman I've ever dated in my entire life, right? So she had that going for her. But she was actually giving her cousin's kid, her niece, a present for Christmas. I met her like 2 or 3 days after Christmas is when I first talked to my wife for the first time. And I remember watching that video on Facebook and thinking to myself, that is someone I could see myself ending up with. I remember I literally had that thought. Because in my mind, beauty is all about possibilities. It's all about the possibilities imagined, if you will. So let's go back to that story. My friend, who had a girlfriend at the time, literally the second this waitress walked away from us, said something to the effect of, "Wow, can you imagine yourself with that girl?" And I started thinking about it, and I did something interesting. Instead of just becoming obsessed with this waitress like he was, I started watching the waitress to see how she interacted with other people. What is she doing that makes my friend and me find her attractive? Right? And so what I noticed is she would go from table to table, man to man, and she would just put this spell on them. It was insane. I would see she would interact with the table, and the men would just be spellbound the second she leave. They'd watch her as she left. You'd see people at the bar kind of eyeing her out of the corner of her eye. And it all, in my opinion, had to do with possibilities. You'd look at that person and you think, what would the future be like with them? Right? You can imagine insane scenarios in your head, what things would be like waking up on a Saturday morning, what your kids would look like, what kind of dates would you go on, how romantic would it be, sometimes sex, what would the sex be like? All of this goes into creating your ideal image. Now, here is the interesting thing. When you're trying to get your ex back, the problem most people have when they're cultivating their ideal images is they're cultivating an image that their ex already has of them. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's pretty simple. Your ex can't imagine any new possibilities because they feel like they've already had all the possibilities with you. So here is my challenge to you. If you want to get your ex to fall in love with you, if you want your ex back, what you need to do is you need to bring something new to the table. I'm not saying you need to change yourself. That's not at all what this is about. This is about creating new possibilities for yourself. Doing something so out of the ordinary that your ex is forced to look at you in this new light. A perfect example of this is someone going skydiving. If you made a hard line throughout your relationship that you would never go skydiving, and then from afar your ex sees you skydiving and having fun and meeting new people, they start to imagine the possibilities. They start to see you as beautiful again and as ungettable. So when I say cultivate your ideal image, that's what I'm talking about. Essentially, it's about cultivating new possibilities. So hopefully that makes sense. This is a fun one to record, guys. Thanks so much. If you haven't already, please take our X Recovery Chances quiz. It's in the description link below. That is the starting point for every newbie to this process. The other thing I'd like to ask you to do, please, is if you can, subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much.